thank you for joining us for today's Ipsos webinar featuring highlights from our Health and Safety Index. Throughout today's session, you will remain in listen-only mode. However, throughout the webinar, you may submit questions online using our Q&A feature located on the right side of the screen. Time permitting, we'll answer questions at the end of today's session. However, if time runs short, then your question will be answered by email. Today's webinar is also being recorded and will be posted to our website within about 48 hours. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Nick Mercurio, Ipsos's Head of U.S. Channel Performance. Nick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining for a very important session on how to reopen with confidence and ensure protections are in place to keep consumers safe, healthy, and loyal in the six-foot economy. I'm Nick Mercurio. A bit of background about me. I've spent over a decade in the customer experience research and consulting space. And most recently, I've become very interested in the health and safety protocols that brands and brick-and-mortar retail can implement to make consumers feel most safe. I'm based in Seattle with my wife, young daughter. Now, the inspiration for this project is personal to me and comes from the fact that we have a new addition to our family, soon to be arriving later this month. We're, of course, very excited for that. And based on where my wife is at in her pregnancy and the current situation, I've been doing all of the shopping in our home. And, of course, I've been doing it very safely. I'm wearing a mask, gloves. I'm bringing hand sanitizer, Clorox wipes everywhere I go. And I'm doing this because it's the smart thing to do and, in my opinion, the right thing to do. At the same time, I've been observing the various attitudes and position towards health and safety that each brand I was shopping at was taking. And two things became very clear. First, some brands were taking it much more seriously than others. I found myself wanting to shop there more. Second, I observed massive inconsistency in what brands were doing across and within industries. So naturally, I would stop shopping at the places that would make me feel unsafe. And while I might have more at stake being a part of an at-risk home, I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. And of course, this topic is not just important to me, it's important to most of society and points to a broader problem that we face. As the economy reopens and brands take steps to ensure consumers feel safe while shopping at their stores, there are a lot of questions. Not doing this will risk customer defection, closed locations, and permanent damage to a brand's reputation and financial viability. But we're in uncharted territory, and frankly, there's no playbook for success. As we spoke to clients, we quickly learned that many are struggling to understand which health and safety policies will have the greatest impact on consumer trust and confidence. And even more challenging for them was how to consistently measure and confirm that frontline managers were executing on the new procedures they were putting in place. Fortunately, the research we present today points to a clear path for solving these problems by answering these three questions. First, what are consumers' new and evolving attitudes towards health and safety? To do this, we're going to share findings from Ipsos's research about the pandemic and health and safety attitudes and perceptions in general. Second, what specific actions can you take to make consumers feel safe while shopping or eating at your locations? We'll share best practices from our research that look at the key drivers of likelihood to return and help you prioritize the actions you can take that will make the most business impact. Last, we'll talk about what your brand can do to proactively measure and manage health and safety. We'll do this via an intro to our new research product, the Consumer Health and Safety Index, which is a cross-industry benchmarking study that leverages both consumer research and mystery shopping to help you understand what you need to do to make consumers feel most safe, and then make sure you're doing it. And by the end of this, we think you'll have learned a few things. It should come as no surprise that health and safety matters a great deal to consumers. And the research shows that they perceive it matters more to them than most of the brands they're shopping at, which is telling. You'll also learn that getting it right is complex. You have shifting consumer perceptions to deal with, local, state, and federal guidelines, you have politics, and it can be costly in terms of investments you might need to make in new protocols, equipment, training. But getting it wrong could be catastrophic. Especially with consumer tensions as high as they are, brands might only get one chance to do things right. So we'll share those specific actions you can take today that will have the most impact and help you prioritize your investment dollars, ultimately asserting that it will be more costly to do nothing than it is to act now. Let's start with an important business question. As we're seeing states and the economy as a whole reopen, when will we be back to business as usual? The answer, unfortunately, is not for a very long time, if ever. To summarize our findings, a majority of Americans expect pandemic conditions to last, will be nervous to leave their homes even if businesses reopen, and are unlikely to quickly return to public spaces or shopping even when conditions are lifted. So let's look at the data for this, which comes from nationally representative polling that we conduct weekly at Ipsos. Of course, in the midst of COVID-19, Americans are picking up many new habits. We're learning new hobbies. We're cooking from scratch more. Some of us are eating healthier. I don't know who those people are, but apparently they are out there. People are stockpiling. They're exploring. But it should come as no surprise that the thing we are doing most is staying at home. Look at this chart, where the bottom axis tracks time, the wavy lines track response rates. When we ask Americans when they believe they'll be able to return to their regular daily routine, most, 69%, believe it will be late summer at earliest. 15% think it won't be until the end of the year, and some much longer. What's interesting, of course, is that each time we ask this, expectations shift to the right, meaning Americans are getting more and more pessimistic about when life will return to normal. And even when businesses are allowed to reopen and travel resumes, 2 in 3 Americans will be nervous to leave their homes. And you can see this sentiment is shared globally. It's not just here in the U.S. Even China, who was largely ahead of the curve, feels the same way. The same is true when you ask consumers a slightly different question, this time oriented towards their shopping behavior. 66% of American consumers will delay returning to brick and mortar for at least 1 week once restrictions are lifted, some much longer. In fact, 30% say it will take at least 3 months before they're comfortable returning to brick and mortar retail. What's more, 61% say that getting sick is the main reason they will avoid in-person shopping. That's scary for consumers, for employees, and for businesses. Now the question is, how long will this persist? We're in an unprecedented situation, that's for sure, but we can try to learn from other crises. And looking back to the 2008 Great Recession, we know these types of anxieties can persist long after the peak of the crisis. This data is from our Affluent survey, which we've run for decades, and in short, it shows that many Americans were very concerned with the economy during and after post-recession period. 75% were very concerned a year after it started, 70% 2 years after, and still 65% 3 years after the start of the crisis. What does this mean for most brands? Given the severity of the current situation, we are likely living in the new normal. Particularly when you consider leading health experts warning that reopening the country too early and without proper precautions could result in a second wave of the virus. Not only do businesses have an obligation to society, to their consumers, and their employees to take health and safety seriously as they reopen, they have an obligation to their shareholders and their bottom line. How costly will it be for brands to reopen, only to have to close back down for not doing things right, or as the virus flares back up? What will be the damage to the reputation, consumer loyalty, profits? The data says it will be a lot, and that consumers will remember those that did it right and those that did not. And that means safe business will be good business for some time. So how do Americans feel about health and safety? Let's transition into talking about some of the data. The information I'm about to share comes directly from our Consumer Health and Safety Index, measuring the attitudes and perceptions that consumers have around health and safety. Our objectives for doing this were twofold. First, to identify the key drivers of likelihood to return to stores that shopper considers to be most critical. Second, identify key insights about future consumer behavior once restrictions are lifted. We polled 2,000 Americans with a nationally representative sample of the U.S. population, and this data is extremely recent. The first portion of the study occurred last week, the second phase just earlier this week. Here's a summary of the key findings. First, trust is low with most retailers right now, but particularly those who already suffer reputationally. Interestingly, customers feel they are exerting more effort than companies to keep themselves safe. Last, there is not only opportunity to grow share of market and share of wallet, but brands that really excel with getting health and safety right have an opportunity to charge a premium. As you might expect, consumers continue to shop most at those retailers deemed essential. 90% have been out to a grocery store within the past 30 days. Many are still frequently going to gas stations and convenience stores, even if they're fueling up less to grab essentials they might have previously bought elsewhere. More discretionary retailers like quick service restaurants or coffee shops have seen significant drop-off. And of course, during these trips, consumers are observing health and safety protocols. They're making judgments about which organizations are putting effort into health and safety and earning or eroding their trust, much like I was doing. Grocery stores are trusted more than any other industry, followed by banks, big box, and club retailers. A little concerning, however, is that 25% of Americans don't trust any industry for their health and safety practices, showing clear opportunity for improvement here. Furthermore, there's a strong relationship between trust for an industry and the perception that the employees take health and safety seriously within that industry. Employees, their attitudes, their behaviors, their actions, and how they are equipped by their employer is extremely important to consumers. And this makes logical sense. Now, how important is health and safety to Americans right now? I'll summarize it by saying very important, as you can see from the numbers below. Take the first chart on the left. The specific question we asked consumers here was, when selecting a retailer to shop at, how important are the health and safety measures they are taking to keep customers and employees safe? 55% were in the top two box. We then asked them about the effort they put into keeping themselves safe. That's the middle graph. And the perceived effort companies were exerting on the far right. The takeaway, customers feel they are exerting more effort than companies, which is usually a very bad recipe and explains largely the low trust scores we see across industries. As you'd expect, health and safety protocols are the most important factor when deciding to return to shopping. They are 4 times more important than good customer service. Suffice it to say, health and safety has become the most important element of the retail customer experience and will be for some time into the future. The implications for companies for not exerting enough effort in this area can be very damaging to their brand. 62% of Americans will stop shopping at retailers who are not taking health and safety seriously. That leaves very little margin for error. But for brands that get this right, they are not only growing share of market and share of wallet, they're earning the right to charge a premium for their products and services. A quarter of Americans are willing to pay at least 10%. Some, 5%, which is approximately 16 million Americans, are willing to pay as much as 25% more. This presents a huge opportunity for some brands, which begs the very important business question. What can brands do to grow and make consumers feel safe in this health and safety critical environment? It's a billion-dollar question, at least, and one which we are going to start to answer. As part 2 of this study, we asked consumers to measure the importance of over 20 health and safety attributes, actions that companies can take at their locations to make them feel safe. They had to rank each attribute on a scale of 1 to 10, with the satisfaction of efforts that companies are taking with each. Everything from clear 6-foot social distancing markers at checkout and outside the store, to contactless checkout, to employees wearing face masks and gloves, hand sanitizers, stocked in restrooms and other areas of the store, a whole battery of attributes. Then we conducted a driver analysis against 5 dependent variables to understand which attributes drive various business outcomes the most. The variables we modeled against are listed here, so likelihood to return to a brand, likelihood to recommend, company trust, company effort, willingness to pay a premium. The models all came back very strong, and they are all strongly correlated to one another. We're going to focus on one that we feel drives the most important and actionable business outcomes right now, the likelihood to return to your stores. So what did we learn? Or more importantly framed, what can you learn about actions you can take and investments you can prioritize to make consumers feel most safe and earn trust, loyalty, and profits? First, the driver analysis we ran generated 2 scores for each attribute, an impact score and a performance score. The performance score ranked how well consumers perceive brands to be doing in terms of implementing the safety and health protocol. Were they satisfied, for example, with how well brands in an industry were doing with regard to employees wearing masks and gloves, with sanitizing materials being available? The impact score ranked how strongly that attribute was correlated to the outcome variable in the model. In this case, likelihood to return to a brand. So if a brand does more of X, say installing plexiglass at checkout, they can expect consumers to return more frequently. We then analyzed and plotted each attribute on a matrix, which you can see here, where the Y or vertical axis is impact and the X or horizontal axis is performance. The better the performance on a particular attribute, the further to the right it is on the X-axis. The more impact an attribute has, the higher up on the Y-axis. We then created 4 quadrants and plotted each attribute on the matrix relative to how it performed in terms of impact and performance. By looking at the attributes in this way, we came up with 3 categories: table stakes, differentiators, and low priority actions. Let's start by looking at the table stakes. We listed them here. These are the attributes that are high on performance across industries, but relatively low to medium impact with consumers. They are employees wearing masks and gloves, hand sanitizer being available at entrance, and restrooms, sanitizing wipes, and social distancing markers outside of the store. Now, to be clear, it's not to say that these are not important. They are. In fact, most of them are very important and are some of the attributes correlated most with consumer satisfaction. But when we look at the model to determine what most drives likelihood to return, they are in the middle quartiles, which means they're becoming so common that they become table stakes. They are your must-haves in terms of making consumers feel safe. And brands are doing these things fairly well. Of course, it depends on your specific industry how well. That is the caveat to all of this and why further analysis of the impact and performance scores become so valuable. Some, like the grocery industry and food service, are doing extremely well with these. Others are not doing as well. But at the end of the day, these are the actions that brands who want to succeed in this new environment absolutely have to be doing. Let's look at a brand, Trader Joe's, who was getting heavily criticized in the media for their initial response to health and safety. Back in April, several articles were published citing Trader Joe's employees who felt the company had not done enough in the early days to keep them and customers safe. But Trader Joe's responded. Fast forward to most recently, you can see some photos from our mystery shops just this week, which show Trader Joe's locations doing all the right things. Signage is clear, it is visible. It also happens to embody the fun-loving nature of the Trader Joe's brand. They're getting all the table stakes right. And what we are seeing in our mystery shop data from the Consumer Health and Safety Index suggests they are also getting this next category right as well, which are the differentiators. These are the actions your brand can take to set yourself apart. They are highest in terms of potential impact scores. And better put, they are the top 5 actions that brands across all industries can take to drive likelihood to return. I'm going to change the slide very quickly so you can't write them all down. No, I kid. Clearly, employee safety equipment provided by the employer is one of them. Organized management of store occupancy is another. Clear 6-foot social distancing markers at checkout. Plexiglass dividers at counters or checkout. And employees visibly disinfecting high-traffic areas. What's interesting here is that these are not only actions that are clear and visible to consumers, they also tend to require more effort by the brand and their employees to implement. Now, they also require a greater level of investment in the table stakes. When you consider buying masks and gloves for all employees, installing plexiglass screens at checkout, both of these can be quite significant investments. But the connection between health, safety, trust, and effort, and then willingness to return more frequently and spend more, mean that for many brands, these are investments that are absolutely worth making in the current environment, particularly when you consider our earlier findings that asserted consumer sentiment around health and safety is not going to change anytime soon, and the potential for defection rates for brands that are not doing enough. Now, let's return to the matrix, isolating just the differentiators to see what else we can learn here. Again, these are the actions brands can take that are high impact and will make consumers more likely to return to your stores. Now, some are higher impact than others. Those are the ones towards the top of the y-axis. And some are performing better than others. Brands are consistently doing a better job implementing attributes on the right, and less so in the middle or towards the left. The highest impact action, and this was true across all of the models that we ran, by the way, is to provide company-issued safety equipment, essentially masks and gloves. You can also see that there's opportunity for improvement here, as performance is just middle of the road. Now, of course, there is an investment required with supplying all employees with face masks and gloves, but when you compare it with an attribute like installing plexiglass at checkout, something this model would suggest more brands are doing, but that has a lower impact, it means that if you had to make a trade-off, it might make more sense to invest in more masks and gloves than it does putting up plexiglass. The attribute with the greatest opportunity for improvement is managing the number of customers that enter the store in an organized fashion, as this is the furthest on the x-axis to the left. We see from the data that the best practice for doing this is leveraging some type of technology, but even manual traffic control can be very, very effective. Let's talk about a couple of brands that are doing this right. Target has been applauded as one of the brands that is doing the most to adjust store policies to account for coronavirus. They supplied all employees with masks and gloves, and I know this because one day a couple of weeks ago I noticed it. I walked in and most employees I saw had masks on and gloves that looked fairly consistent. But then I saw one woman with a bright red mask on that looked very different from the rest, but it also complemented the store brand and colors. So I went up, I was curious, and politely asked her if Target was supplying employees with masks or if they were bringing their own. And she said Target was supplying everyone with the masks and that she appreciated it, but that her mom had made this one to match her work uniform and that she wore it over the company-issued one. So she was wearing two masks. Talk about making a customer feel safe and in a way connected to the Target brand. You can also see that Target is getting many of the table stakes right. Social distancing markers, employees, actively cleaning, communication to guests about coronavirus. Now, Costco is another brand that has taken criticism in the news for their handling of coronavirus health and safety procedures, but largely because they have, in the eyes of some people, including Eric Torres, the person who wrote and then later deleted the tweet on the screen, but this came from a public article, so I'm okay sharing it. Many people, though, feel like Costco has overstepped in an effort to protect consumer and employee health. This is largely based on them requiring customers, not just employees, to wear masks when shopping in their warehouses. The only exceptions are for children under 2 and for those with an existing medical condition that would prevent them from wearing a mask. They are literally turning away some customers in an effort to protect others. That is bold, especially at a time when so many are desperately seeking to increase the traffic. But long term, you have to wonder how this will play out. CEO Craig Jelinek wrote a letter to members explaining why Costco took this stance, and he writes, "We know some members may find this inconvenient or objectionable, but under the circumstances, we believe the added safety is worth any inconvenience. In short, we believe this is the right thing to do." And Costco is doing a host of other things, meeting all table stakes and differentiators in their effort to keep members safe while shopping. You can see control out front, clear social distancing signage, one-way aisles, plexiglass at checkout, additional reminders around not bringing personal bags, labor that is being invested to actively clean checkout and other things in that area. Clearly, employees wearing consistent masks and gloves, even ensuring a contactless checkout experience by taping your receipt to the front of a cart. The third category of actions are the ones that in the model appear to have very little impact on likelihood to return, or perhaps in some cases where the jury is still out. Take, for example, the 4 actions in the top row: intercom reminders, taking customer temperatures, one-way aisles, or quizzing customers on their recent travel. These are all at the bottom of the model. Some may be viewed as intrusive, ineffective. The bottom 3 are a little more interesting and present a question that we are digging into with the research. Think about Costco requiring masks or contactless checkout, which to date in the U.S. has a lower adoption rate than the rest of the world, but based on our research is growing because of changes the pandemic has forced upon shopping behaviors. Or look at store restrooms that have motion sensors, which interestingly, very interestingly actually, moves up the model for the outcome variable that measures a consumer's willingness to pay more. So you may think about your consumer and where they fit on that. These could all be instances, though, where the consumer preference has not quite caught up with the market, meaning it's possible consumers don't know what they want quite yet. McDonald's just earlier this week released guidance to their franchisees, which makes touch-free restrooms a major investment priority, so that's interesting. Starbucks has made their mobile app a piece in the reopening plans for their locations, centered around renewed health and safety practices. A few other things to remember that are important. First, the results presented here have been generalized for all industries included in the study. The specific actions, and this is important, that you should take and that will have the most impact will depend on a variety of factors, including your specific industry. What's required for brands that are in food service will be different for those that are in financial services. So you will need to get access to this data and analyze it for your industry, specifically to be able to accurately understand both impact and performance, but also help you prioritize investments. Second, the actions you can take are also impacted by the profile of your target consumer, as the importance of health and safety does vary by gender, age, political affiliation, and geography, as you might expect. This is another reason why you'll need this data to make good, informed decisions. What should brands avoid doing? I think most of this is common sense, but we'd be remiss if we didn't share it. So first, doing nothing at all. Hope we've made that point. You should avoid actions that appear inconsistent to consumers for sure. And you should avoid instances where it appears the customer is exerting more effort than you, the brand. Got a few pictures here from my local mom and pop hardware store where there is signage at the front of the store, but none of it relating to health and safety protocol. You've got inconsistency in standards. Some employees wearing masks, others not. You've got definite mixed signals at checkout. There is plexiglass up, but none of the employees are wearing masks. None of them are wearing gloves. And in fact, you've got a customer who's clearly taking their health and safety into their own hands and more importantly, putting more effort into it than the brand themselves, wearing a mask and gloves. So a few final thoughts from this section. First, shoppers trust retailers who are taking highly visible and consistent efforts to keep them healthy and safe without requiring the customers themselves to take on that responsibility. It's especially important that the actions you take are visible. If customers don't see you cleaning before they arrive, they don't know you did it. Second, employees are your number one asset. Make sure they are being leveraged visibly and consistently. The effort they exert and the seriousness with which they and you take health and safety is highly, highly correlated to trust. They shouldn't be joking about safety or making offhand comments to customers who are taking it seriously, as, believe it or not, we've seen in some of our benchmarking data. Finally, consumer preference is quickly evolving. You need to be ready to pivot and adapt on the fly. What was a differentiator today could quickly become a table stake. We are already seeing brands invest in the next phase of health and safety to get ahead. So you need to constantly refresh this research and stay close to consumer demands and expectations. Okay, so what is the Consumer Health and Safety Index, and how does it build off this information and help you solve these very critical business issues? In short, it's a cross-industry syndicated benchmarking study measuring how effectively brands are delivering on the health and safety initiatives that are most important to consumers, informed by proprietary Ipsos research. It consists of two components. The first, health and safety attitudes and attributes survey data and driver analysis. This is some of the information we shared today, but not all. It will allow you to analyze the health and safety attributes most important to your consumers for your specific industry, understand the relationships between them and how you can best leverage your investment dollars to ensure consumers continue to feel safe when shopping in your stores. The second component, which we haven't talked a great deal about, is a cross-industry health and safety mystery shop index. This is where we take those same attributes measured in the consumer survey and measure brand compliance to these via a certified mystery shop. This will allow you to objectively see how well your brand is performing at the front line in delivering these policies and procedures. We know many gaps can exist in execution when it comes out to rolling these types of initiatives. So the mystery shop data will allow you to see how well you are performing, as well as benchmark your performance against key competitors inside your industry and across best-in-class brands outside of your industry. The attribute weights from the consumer survey that we've generated with the outcome variables are applied to the mystery shop scorecard, which creates a cross-industry index score on performance. Now, I'm going to walk through the rest of this information, but in short, the study is being executed as we speak across 50 brands and 7 key industries. It's measuring all of the attributes we discussed earlier in the consumer survey and more, from social distancing signage and markers being present to message boards being posted, sanitizers and wipes being available, employees wearing masks and gloves, plexiglass at checkout, employees actively cleaning high-traffic areas, contactless checkout, you name it, we are measuring it. It's got over 30 different questions on the scorecard. And if you purchase the data, there are a variety of different deliverables which you will receive, which we'll cover. We've already spent a lot of time discussing the consumer survey, so I will keep it brief here. But you'll have nationally representative data from over 2,000 respondents, industry-specific impact and performance driver scores for all health and safety attributes, as well as industry-specific maps and recommendations on the things that you can do to maximize investment. With the certified mystery shop component, you'll receive over 5,000 mystery shops conducted across approximately 50 brands this month, anywhere between 75 and 125 mystery shops per brand with geographic representation, which gives statistically valid results at the brand level. This will allow you to not only learn how your network is doing, but also see how you rank relative to your competition, because, of course, in this space, rank really does matter, especially with regard to health and safety. Importantly, all mystery shoppers conducting the study will have gone through our iShopSafe certification, meaning they've been briefed and certified on proper health and safety protocols from the CDC, so you can rest assured they are safe and keeping your consumers and employees safe while conducting their assessment. We've started by including 7 industries in the first wave of this index: big box, home improvement, retail petroleum and convenience store, drugstores, grocery, quick service restaurants, and telecoms. All essential retailers, all with potential for short-term switching behaviors to occur should brands not get this right. It's comprised largely of national and iconic brands. You'll need to contact us to know exactly who is in the index, but it's all of the who's who. For information, we will also be including banks and automotive dealerships in future waves of the study. They are just not at a point operationally where it was feasible to collect information at this time. If you purchase the index, of course, you'll get several key deliverables, the data itself in Excel and SPSS, as well as executive benchmark reports, an online reporting platform, and cross-industry insights and recommendations decks. So you can see your areas of opportunity as well as what other brands are doing to succeed. You can see an example of what this would look like in the index with your scores relative to peers and across industry averages. There are a number of extremely valuable things you'll be able to do with this data. I can't understate this enough. Of course, understand what makes consumers feel safe in your locations. Compare how well you're doing against your direct peers as well as across industries and adjust your policies and procedures as necessary. And also, you can make sure new policies and initiatives are being rolled out successfully. You can confirm the promises you are making to customers are being delivered. And if not, identify where and remedy. Importantly, you can make sure your locations are complying with state and local regulations to ensure that they remain open. And ultimately, build consumer confidence in your brand at a time that is critical and will last long into the future. In terms of timing, you can purchase or opt into the index now. We believe this is information that every organization should not only want, but will need. Wave 1 of the fieldwork, as I mentioned, is currently underway, and we expect results to be released before the end of May. We plan to run at least 2 additional waves in June and July, and then, of course, we'll reassess the situation and where we are as a country and just determine if it's something that is necessary for brands to continue. To close, of course, there are clearly many important things that your organization and the country are going through right now. But at the top of the priority list needs to be protecting consumer and employee health and safety. You need to make sure you are analyzing consumer preferences by industry, demographics, and geographic region, reviewing current health and safety protocols and aligning them with consumer expectations and industry best practices. You should be communicating visibly with customers on the steps that you are taking to keep them safe and ensuring you are executing in store. And last, make sure you are measuring how you're doing, fixing things that are not working, and adapting to the changing demands of consumers and the market. I'd like to thank you all for your time. We hope that you found the information presented valuable today. A copy of this presentation along with a recording of the webinar will be sent out to you. For those of you who are kind enough to submit a question, we will follow up with you. So thank you, and be well and be safe. Thanks, everyone.